This is the intro to the show. The intro to the show. I'm trying hard not to sing along so we don't get sued. The podcast will start soon, and we think you'll like it because it's on Garry Shandling Show. This is the intro to the show, the one about Garry show. These are the words that parody the words to his theme song. We're almost to the part where the guitars kick in. Then we'll talk about It's Garry Shandling Show. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Oh, hello there. Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about It's Garry Shandling Show.
Yes, we are.
I want to be looking at the audience while we're talking about it, but we can't be. We're doing a podcast.
No, we'll just have to visualize them, I guess.
Yeah.
I like to think we have a direct contact with our audience that doesn't require visual connection.
Yeah, I think so. How's my hair?
It's looking really good today, by the way.
Yeah, I just get a good haircut not too long ago. And this was your idea, but I certainly was all in favor of it.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite shows in the 1980s, actually. And I recently went through and watched the whole series. It was one of those things where I had some of the episodes and I had kind of started a couple of times, but knowing that we were going to do it on the podcast gave me a quote unquote excuse to just go through and watch them all. And I did. And I enjoyed it.
I bet.
With some reservations.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get to watch as many as I had hoped to, but I plan on watching more.
Mm-hmm.
I got a kick out of it. Now, I didn't see it much when it was originally on, except for like in the Fox repeats of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many I saw even then. It seems like they kept moving the time of it on Sundays.
I think they did. And I think for a while they were in like at 10 o'clock and 10:30, I think.
Right.
Like weird times on Fox.
Which surprised because I don't remember Fox having anything on at those times. Like even now they don't have
weird programming, and they had stuff on Saturdays, and those early days of Fox are kind of fascinating. But they had some good stuff, and Garry Shandling was a really good reason to tune into Fox. But I actually watched it for a while on Showtime too. There were a couple of reasons to have Showtime back in the day. One of them was the lost episodes of the Honeymooners they got, and It's Garry Shandling Show was another great reason to get Showtime.
Well, as many people said then and still say today, we didn't have Showtime.
Yes.
But I do remember being aware of this show, and being curious about it because I knew him from, I don't know, guest hosting the Tonight Show, or maybe he had already done the Grammys by then, or been on. I don't know if he was ever on the Will Shriner Show, but that's where I learned about a whole generation of comedians.
There's a pull.
Yeah.
The Will Shriner Show.
Oh yeah,
that's great.
It's another summer thing I remember watching a lot, and
yeah,
like seeing Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and George Wallace and Larry Miller. I think that whole group of people show up on that show.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think, and maybe someone told me about it, but I wanted to see it, so I was glad to watch it on Fox.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember sort of being aware of Garry Shandling and his stand-up in various places, and I do remember one of my friends sort of doing a particular joke of his that became notorious. I think it was the black sock joke, I believe it was. And if they're listening now, they'll know what it was. I don't know I don't remember the joke itself, but but the fact, like, me and my friends around like late 80s, early 90s were definitely aware of Garry Shandling and him as a comedian and the show. It's one of those things where it has the central gimmick of breaking the fourth wall, playing with the form and talking directly to the audience, which was not a new concept, as even they admitted. But at the time, and in the late 1980s, it really felt fresh. I mean, we talked about Moonlighting was a show that did some of these things, but just the way Garry Shandling Show did this was unlike, in the sitcom format, was unlike 90% of everything else on TV, and it was just so funny the way they did it too.
Well, in our Mr. Rogers episode, you made a comparison, and I think that's good. A good comparison. I mean, Mr. Rogers doesn't have an audience, but a studio audience in his house.
Yeah.
He still talks to the camera in the same way, and well, not the same way.
Well,
he's not making as many jokes.
A lot of it opens in Gary's home, his Sherman Oaks condo.
Yeah.
As many Mr. Rogers episodes begin with him in that one set,
and then he'll well, let me go over to this place, and
yeah,
and then you just cut and he's there.
Right.
Yeah. There are definitely similarities, and I see references to like the George Burns and Gracie Allen, but I haven't seen that, so I don't know like how they staged that. I know some of the Jack Benny ones, he'd sort of be in a theater or on a stage and introduce it, and then they'd show
Right.
the domestic scenes.
Yeah, like one big difference with Burns and Allen was usually everybody else would act like George Burns was the one who interacted with the camera, and everybody else was acting out the regular story. Whereas in its Garry Shandling show, like everybody's aware of it
Yes.
and kind of commenting on that to a little bit more extent. But yeah, they do things where like George Burns would comment on what was going to happen and say things he was going to do in the next, and like say like, oh, Gracie's going to come here and do this, but I think maybe I'll go this way and just see how it plays out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Gary's always doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think even maybe in the first episode, okay, I'm going to move the story along.
Yeah. I mean, I think they would take it to another level. Like, he's got like a time machine and like a dream hat or something like that. And just these other like fantastic elements, that they add into the show. But
Right.
and you actually see the studio audience many times too.
Yes, and the camera.
Yeah, he'll actually go out and interact with them and take tours through the studio and everything. So
Right.
But yeah, it all works. And one thing that's kind of interesting is I think it's great, but the more I read about the show and Garry Shandling's attitudes towards it, he seemed to be kind of dissatisfied with it. And he was a lot more complicated guy than you might think, as we know now. But it seemed like he became frustrated with the limits of the show. Like he wanted to do things, and this is going to sound pretentious, he wanted to do things focusing on the human condition.
Yeah.
He wanted to do things where, and I thought one thing that was interesting in the Judd Apatow book, it's Garry Shandling's book, I think they mentioned that acting, he wanted to do actual like acting, which is what appealed him to like something like Larry Sanders Show, because he could play a character. In this, yeah, it was sort of a character, but really he thought that it was harder for them to come up with actual situations and stories because they were so reliant on like that gimmick of the show.
I do think that limits. I mean, it's just hard. Once that you've established that reality, I don't think you can get too deep emotionally.
Yeah.
I think every now and then there's some kind of scene. Like the second season, the Christmas episode has a few little moments of sincerity. But
yeah,
it's much more difficult. Where Larry Sanders really.
Yeah, on Larry Sanders Show, they did get into things, and it was more about human beings, and I think he said it was about people that were trying to find love or something like that.
Yeah, but it's still able to be kind of meta too.
Yeah.
Like deconstruct the talk show.
Right. And I respect that, but I do think it's a shame that for me, the Larry Sanders Show has overshadowed It's Garry Shandling Show. I think it was Shout Factory that released the whole series, It's Garry Shandling Show, on DVD, but you don't really see it in reruns anywhere. It's not been on streaming, legally anywhere. And Larry Sanders was out of circulation for a while too, but they were always, hey, where's Larry Sanders Show? Why is this not on HBO Now or whatever? And it's fine. I'm not trying to knock that one. I love that show too. But, I think It's Garry Shandling Show is very underappreciated because I do think it was one of the best shows of the decade.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a forerunner to The Simpsons and Community and all sorts of things, and even some of the dumb stuff we do.
Yeah.
And, and fits right in, I think, with like Letterman, which of course is deconstructing talk shows too. But, and you see, I mean, just the episode we're going to talk about, I mean, I saw the writing credits on it. It's like, these are sort of giants of TV comedy.
Yeah.
Writing this episode. And besides Garry Shandling and Alan Zweibel, it's just so people, who are involved in The Simpsons, Seinfeld, and it's just definitely ahead of its time and an important show.
And speaking of the writers in talent, I think Al Jean, who's a showrunner on The Simpsons still, I think, right? He's running the show right now, and a longtime writer of that. I think it's in the Judd Apatow book where he says something like he was dating someone and she mentioned that she liked the Garry Shandling Show, and he's like, oh yeah, Larry Sanders should know the first one, and his reaction was like, the first one, oh, I love you, or something like that. Kind of like it's a comic kind of show, or that people loved it, like in the industry and everything.
Right.
But to me, that's an example. Like that particular book, it's maybe like 5 to 10% of it is devoted to this show. There's a ton on Larry Sanders and a ton on his early life, but there's just not that much about the show, and it's hard to find just not a lot of writing about it. I read Alan Zweibel's book Laugh Lines, and he has a lot of information about it. He kind of was co-writing the show and doing a lot of it with Garry, and he has a lot of insights into it, but you just don't get like a lot of like big analysis of information about it. And for me, it took me a while. I was very curious, like, why did he end the show and what his feelings were? And it just seems a lot of it were he was very committed, and he mellowed out a little bit later, but he was totally devoted to the show. And I think Alan Zweibel has said that he thinks that like Garry resented the fact that he wanted to go to Disneyland or with his kids or something, like that he wasn't available 24 hours to work on the show. And one thing that's interesting, I think, is like in this episode, even, which we'll get into, like the monologue, it seems almost like there's kind of a ragged feel to it almost. And the show sometimes has sort of like a feel like some of it's improvised, which is good. It should, based on the nature of the show. However, it just seems like they wrote and rewrote every episode to death.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that like drove a lot of people to get burnt out in the show, and probably, Gary himself, but they could not just let it go and write up into it. They would always be tinkering with it and trying to make it funnier.
Yeah. And I mean, because of the nature of the show, it's all about funny.
Yeah.
Whereas Larry Sanders, which I get the impression, there was a lot of that on that too. I mean, they went through a lot of different writers and consulting writers and all of that, but the nature of it wasn't joke. So
Right.
probably the refining process was a different refining process.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem like he was kind of a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And of course, he was an engineering background, right? So that
Yeah.
I'm sure that somewhere that mind gets involved in that.
And I think it was in a way like he wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate what it was he was looking for, but he always thought or knew that he could make things better. Now, I'll just go ahead and say this off the bat here. I was very disappointed by the fourth season, and I thought like the first two seasons of this are excellent, and the third season is pretty good too. And then the fourth season, the show it makes a very big format change. He gets married to Jessica Harper, plays the character, and she becomes like a part of the show, and like a lot of it changes. And I think part of it was like him trying to come up with other stories, and it was probably a conscious decision. But it's not like it's a will they, won't they changing. It's just like they decided to give him a wife and make that part of the show, and it leads to some interesting things. But to me, there's a lot of disappointing episodes, and I don't think I've ever seen a show drop off that much. Your mileage may vary, but there's still some good stuff in that last season. But I was watching it and thinking, man, this is just a real decline. And then I was thinking, it's no wonder he's done with it. I don't know if it's conscious, but I think his heart maybe wasn't in it, and it was just harder for them to do the kind of stories they wanted to. But just the fourth season, there is a big drop off, I think.
So this is why Bell left at some point, right?
Yeah, he left. He did come back and I think helped with some of the final episodes, and they actually had a big falling out. And of course, Gary's not around, so we don't really have his side of that. But he kind of, I think Alan Zoidberg kind of takes responsibility. I think he's kind of pretty gracious about it. But they did have a reconciliation eventually. But I was kind of going through looking at the writing credits, trying to see, and there are a lot of other writers in that fourth season. But it just seems like overall, maybe I hate to say that they shouldn't have done another season, but because part of me thinks you're not doing shows that are human or whatever. So what if you just keep doing shows like this because they're hilarious?
Yeah.
But maybe that's tough to do. But
yeah, I mean, if that's not where your heart is,
yeah,
I can understand not wanting to do it anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that probably, if he was disappointed in them, then that would cause more conflict, I'm sure. Internal conflict.
Yeah, and and the thing is too, he came from a background where he wrote, scripts for Sanford and Son and Welcome Back, Kotter, in the 70s. So he sort of, I think it was Weibel that said he had sort of had a love-hate relationship with that, with the whole genre, and he sort of knew what it was. And I guess when NBC came to him to do a show, and he kind of explained what it was and the concept. And they're like, I mean, he might be exaggerating, but they were like, well, can you own a hardware store or something? And they wanted him to have a dog that he would talk to and stuff instead of the, and that kind of stuff. They just couldn't handle it. And it was Showtime that said, hey, if you do a show for us, you can do whatever you want.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody will watch it, but you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, good on them.
Exactly. And
I make fun of Showtime, but good on them.
Yeah. And he did, I guess, before this too, I think the anniversary special.
Yes.
Sort of a mock anniversary special of a Carson-like show, which is great, and that kind of put seeds for a lot of different things when they did that so well. So,
and Alan Zoidberg, was he one of the original SNL writers?
Yes, he was there in the early days, the Not Ready for Primetime Players, and he started out in the literally writing jokes for Catskills comics and stuff like that,
right.
and
so
kind of worked his way up and everything. And so, yeah, I very much recommend that book, Laugh Lines. There's a lot about his relationships with Gilda Radner, Garry Shandling, a lot about his own career, and Rob Reiner. So
doesn't Rob Reiner appear in a lot of episodes?
He does, yes, as Garry Shandling show, as Gary's neighbor and friend. Yeah,
yeah. I didn't get a chance to see any of those, but
yeah, there's a lot of good guest stars on the show, and that really seem to get into the spirit of things. And it's a really, I hate to say, I think it did get a lot of attention when Garry Shandling died unexpectedly, but I still think it's kind of out there as this kind of underappreciated gem that people should really kind of seek out if they can.
I think, yeah, some streamer should have it.
Yeah, I don't know what the whole up is.
I bet it would catch on with all sorts of people.
Yeah. And, the other thing, too, about it is, and kind of rewatching it, and even this episode, I think this episode is great. It's hilarious, but I still remember, like, vividly watching it the first time and just how laugh out loud hilarious is. And it's kind of like the early Simpsons, where it's like, man, it's great, but it's not as good as that first time just because it was so different than everything else that was on TV at the time. And this has a lot of that, where it's like, man, if you watch it the first time, you can probably get the same thing, but you really might have appreciated it even more if you were watching it, as it was airing back in the late 80s.
Plus, Tom Petty shows up.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with that.
I do remember seeing one on Fox, and he was there, and I don't know if it was a Christmas one or a different one where he was mostly kind of just in the background a little bit.
Yeah.
Tom Petty? Why is Tom Petty? What?
It's like they would do things like that, like have Tom Petty be on, but just not build a show around Tom Petty, just have him be there.
Right, yeah.
And like hanging out.
And I mean, I know they were friends, and the Larry Sanders DVD set has an extra where there are a bunch of extras where Garry Shandling just goes and talks to people. And one of them's him hanging out with Tom Petty. It's good. It's good. They just are very funny together.
Yeah. Talk about two guys that we lost way too soon.
Yeah.
Just two like greats and two of our favorites. I think it's fair to say, man.
Yeah.
It sucks, but the work does live on, and I'm really glad we're talking about this show. And I think this is a really fun episode.
Yeah, the episode is called Go Goldblum.
So Garry was on for 4 seasons, 72 episodes, 1986 to 1990 on Showtime, and then it was on Fox, mostly Sundays, I think, from 1988 to 1990. Now, this particular episode premiered March 4th, 1988. And Mike, would you like to know what else was on TV the night that this premiered on Showtime, including what else was on Showtime that night?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What about HBO?
Well, I've got HBO, as a matter of fact.
Do you have Cinemax?
I do have Cinemax.
Do you have the movie channel?
I don't have the movie channel, no. Sorry.
Another one, no one.
Many
people have said that, too.
You got me with that one. Yes. So this was a Friday night. It was the 15th episode of the second season of It's Garry Shandling Show. And starting off at 8 p.m. on CBS was Beauty and the Beast. NBC had Highwayman, which is the show with Jocko, and I think Sam Jones, was it? Jocko was like an Australian import that they were trying to make a big star or something. ABC, Perfect Strangers on Friday night. That's familiar. HBO had The Exorcist, the original. And now this is interesting. According to my research, the same movie was on Showtime and Cinemax at 8 p.m. Now, back then, I think there was some crossover in some of the licensing deals, so this was more of a thing, although not usually at the same exact time like this.
Right, yeah.
It wouldn't happen now for various reasons, but the movie was...
Can I guess?
Yeah, sure.
Weekend at Bernie's.
Not Weekend at Bernie's. Very good guess. It is a comedy.
Porky's.
Not Porky's.
No, probably not Aid.
A comedy from more prestigious filmmakers.
Oh, filmmakers. Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Raising Arizona.
Way.
On both Showtime and Cinemax.
Wow.
So then 8:30, ABC would have Full House after Perfect Strangers. Expected, right? Dallas on CBS at 9. So this has got to be near the end of Dallas's run, right? A very long run they had. Miami Vice on NBC. ABC had Mr. Belvedere at 9. 9:30 was The Thorns, which is a sitcom on ABC that didn't last very long. It had Tony Roberts, a young Lori Petty, and Kelly Bishop, who I believe was the matriarch on the Gilmore Girls.
Yes.
There was some upwardly mobile or socially climbing family trying to fit into society or something like that. 9:30 is where we get the divide here between Cinemax and Showtime. Showtime, I have at 9:45, they had the Showtime Comedy Club Network, basically just filler of stand-up bits or whatever. Whereas Cinemax goes Lethal Weapon at 9:30. And that didn't surprise me because I think that was on HBO or Cinemax all the time back then. 10 o'clock, we get Falcon Crest on CBS. One of your favorites, Sunny Spoon on NBC.
Right. Mario Van Peebles.
Yes. ABC had 2020. HBO had The Exorcist 2, following The Exorcist.
Exorcist night.
And then we finally get to Garry Shandling Show at 10. Following Garry Shandling Show on Showtime was Brothers, a sitcom. I think it's come up on the podcast before. It had Robert Walden. It was famous for having a regular gay character as one of the brothers.
Ah, yeah.
And I think it was one of their signature shows for a while, actually, on Showtime.
I remember it existing.
Yeah, it did exist on this particular Friday night. So that was what was going on March 4th, 1988.
Okay. Exciting night, someone said.
Truly is something for everybody, especially when you expand it out to premium cable.
Right.
You get to see some much viewed movies.
Yeah. I wonder if that would have been frustrating if you had paid for all the movie channels and you're like,
yeah.
Maybe you're not into horror. So you're like, oh, what's on Cinemax? Raising Arizona.
Yes.
That movie looks weird. And Showtime, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Boy, I hope something good's on the movie channel.
Yeah, if you got like an ultimate cable package with everything, that probably wouldn't sit too well with you. And back then, I don't know if you would get like Showtime West and the multi-channels where you'd have like HBO2 and
I don't think so.
Cinemax East and all that. And
Yeah.
so, but if you had Showtime and Cinemax, you probably had dozens of other cable channels too,
Yeah.
which I won't go into. But
Right. And what Showtime should have done is built the night around Jeff Goldblum
yes,
if they had the rights.
could have had a Jeff Goldblum movie.
Yeah. The Fly,
Yeah,
Pennsylvania 6-5.
yeah. Annie Hall.
Anyhow.
I forgot he was in Annie Hall until Grant Schumacher
Yeah.
pointed that out. So yes, you've revealed the guest star of the episode.
Well,
but
I think
we
people
know the
might have guessed that.
yes from Go Goldblum.
Yeah. One of the guest stars.
That's right.
There's another one. We definitely won't
Another favorite of
spoil
ours.
yet. Yes. That truly was a surprise for me since I hadn't seen the episode.
Yeah, that was good. I recommended it and wanted to say as little as possible.
Yeah.
Much like I do on the podcast. I talk, but I say as little as possible.
There you go. So, and I hinted at the writers, but it is written by Tom Gamble, Max Pross, and Sam Simon.
Yeah.
So Gamble and Pross were on SNL at some point, and Letterman, and Seinfeld later,
Yeah.
and Sam Simon, of course, co-created The Simpsons.
It seems like it. It seems like,
Like he was the real voice of that.
yeah, a lot of people give him a lot of credit for like stuff that people loved about the TV show.
Yeah.
Is maybe the most concise way to say it.
Yeah, I'm sure James L. Brooks was too busy to be there
Yeah.
every day. And you know, I don't know. I know Matt Groening is very involved, but it does seem like, yeah, Sam Simon was
Seems
a
like
huge
a lot of
part of it.
the comic sensibility came from him, it seems like. But yeah, he was very involved with the early years of The Simpsons, yes.
Yeah, it's a murderer's row there of
Yes.
writers. And it opens as you know, most of them do with Gary doing a sort of little monologue, sort of about what's going to happen. Much like a talk show, he's addressing both the at-home audience and the audience in his home.
Yeah. They give him a rousing ovation when he comes out.
Yeah, like I noted that. I'm like, boy, and then of course that's part of the monologue that he encouraged them, and he says something about like they got in for free in my house,
Yeah.
and he says it's a good night because he's going to the Schumachers for dinner, and the Schumachers are regular characters. Pete is his best friend, and his son Grant is a big part of the show. I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah.
It's sort of weird.
Pete, played by the great Michael Tucci from Grease, one of the T-Birds. So I really like his character on the show.
Yeah.
He's rather nebbishy,
Yes.
but the best friend of Gary.
Yeah. Do we know what kind of work he's in?
He's a shoe salesman. I think he changes careers at some point. Or has like a couple of midlife crisis, but I think he's a shoe salesman.
And they play basketball a lot together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Grant is I don't know how old he is at this point, but he has a birthday during this episode.
Right.
But he's also Nebushi's son.
Yes. And as he sort of enters his more awkward teenage years as the show goes on too. He gets like noticeably older and he gets like a lot more of an edge to him really.
Oh.
Like he becomes more like confrontational and a little bit crankier to everybody, like sort of like the stereotypical teenager.
Yeah. I know in the Christmas episode he was complaining that there aren't any single ladies at the party. Yeah, and he calls, Gary Uncle Gary.
Mhm.
And then Jackie, the wife/mother, who's a recurring character.
Mhm.
So he's gonna go there, and then he keeps sort of talking about his what a busy life he has, walking from there to here.
Yeah.
Sometimes he sits over there,
Yeah.
and he says something about being deboned in the 7th grade.
Yes, he was always bullied.
Yes.
He said, in fact, it was deboned in the 7th grade.
Yeah. And then there's an old joke, but
Yeah.
laugh or something. And then during the theme song, he says, "I'm going to be busy while the theme song plays." And yeah, he's just kind of looking in cabinets. And
Yeah. And all the while, just kind of that thing he does where he's sort of awkwardly looking at the camera as he does
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
which makes it even funnier.
yeah. And really, I meant to say earlier, I think part of what makes all of that stuff work is him. Like someone with a different personality, I don't know if it would work as well.
Right.
But he's got that, just the way he delivers is sort of deadpan.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
that Garry Shandling thing.
And the semi-pained expression.
Yes. Like, even like, oh, why am I in this?
Yeah.
And of course, the theme to Garry Shandling show.
Yeah.
A classic.
Which Zweibel says that he and Gary basically wrote it on an elevator ride.
Uh,
Like they just sort of came up to it and they started trading lines back and forth, and it was a good example of them being able to collaborate together because they came up with almost the whole thing like in a snap.
I saw a little snippet of Shandling talking about it. He said like conceptually he knew because he knew what the show was this deconstruction of sitcoms, and he's like the theme song is just it's just the theme song. And then Zweibel like he gave Zweibel a lot of credit for running with it. And he's like I think he came up with most of it.
Oh, that's cool.
But it's the very literal theme
Yeah.
song. And then he said they had two different people record it, and someone listened to it, and they were like, "Well, you can't use that one. That one's too silly." And of course, that's the one they used. Yeah, and the whistling and that's great.
Yeah.
It's been in my head.
Like, and just like we're almost to the part of where I start to whistle.
Yeah,
Like there's something about the way that's phrased that always cracks me up. Yeah. Like if people remember anything about the show, the theme song is maybe it too.
Yeah.
And justifiably so. It's great.
Yeah, and hard to forget.
Yeah.
So after the theme song, his neighbor and platonic friend Nancy shows up, and she has an invitation to a party at Jeff Goldblum's that was in her mail by mistake. But now Gary has a dilemma because it's tonight. It's the same night as the dinner at the Schumachers. What's he gonna do? Classic sitcom dilemma.
Well, and she has a good solution.
Yeah, just go to both.
Yeah. And he thinks it's brilliant.
Yeah, and the audience does too.
Yeah. I like how she's going to leave and he says, "No, stick around. I want you here for a joke I'm going to do."
Yeah. And then she doesn't really like the joke, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think anybody, and he just says, "See, that's why I wanted you around for this."
So then we're at dinner at the Schumachers, and he's like sitting in a chair, and he's going right back and forth between the conversation and talking to the audience and making little asides.
Right.
And Pete seems to be overdoing his laughter to some of these jokes.
Yeah. He's very enthusiastic responses, almost like a sidekick.
Right. And like Gary tells the audience that they think he's a bad influence on Grant, just because he burped the preamble of the Constitution.
Yeah.
But you could say, he's itching to go because he's got this other party to go to, And Pete and Jackie want to, I guess, say about a baby too, and they want to show pictures and all these things, and it's all like, pictures of the baby sleeping and films of the baby moving.
As an aside here, they had a naming contest, which you can see like on the versions we were watching with the original promos, but they had an ongoing contest to name the baby, and Jeff Goldblum makes a passing reference to it later.
Oh, yeah.
The baby was named, and I don't know if the contest was legit or not, but Blue Suede
Oh,
was the name of the baby.
Yeah, I had no idea what that meant.
So that's what it was. That was the baby's name. I think maybe the episode before or after. Or there was an episode before where they revealed it. I guess it must have been the episode before for Goldblum to make that. But I think they hadn't had the baby. I'm not sure what the timeline is, but that's what that was a reference to. And they had a big contest that they announced like at the end of each episode.
I thought it was a reference to like Grant's clothes or something. But they want to show Grant learning the box step.
Oh, man.
That's exciting.
That was something with his dad playing piano.
Yeah, and he's dancing with his mom.
Yeah, it's very charming.
Yeah.
Rather Norman Rockwell-esque scene, I think.
Yeah.
His great family.
And then they want to play the home version of Win, Lose, Your Draw.
Yeah. Let's get the
Like,
home
you'll love
version.
it. It's like charades, but you draw. And so Gary has to explain, well, he has this other party to go to. And Grant's like, oh, Jeff Goldblum's my favorite actor. Is mentioning all these
Yeah.
movie, not Pennsylvania 6-5. That comes up later, but The Fly and The Big Chill, and neither of which seem age appropriate.
Yes.
And Annie Hall.
Right.
Where I guess like Goldblum has one line or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the "I can't find my mantra" line in Annie Hall.
Yeah.
I love him. The Fly, the "I can't find my mantra" line in Annie Hall.
And we learned that it's Grant's birthday next day. So it's a little awkward, and then but they're like, oh, fine, have fun. We'll see you tomorrow,
Gary offers to stay and do a few rounds, but they no, go ahead, Gary.
He goes outside, and his ears are like beet red.
Yeah.
And there's smoke actually coming from them. He's like, oh, someone must be talking about.
Yeah. Oh no. And just the way he goes through stuff like this is very funny.
So, back inside it, they're disappointed. Grant's like, what are we, the Elephant Man family?
Yeah, I like that.
And he says, I feel violated.
Yeah, Pete seems to be defending him a little bit, but
Wow.
Jackie, I think it's Jackie that says he's gone showbiz. That's sad.
And then Pete starts playing the piano, and Gary comes back in like in front of them, is addressing the audience.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think they're the Elephant Man family. And that's another joke about bones. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
Michael Jackson tried to offer
Offered
to
him,
buy
yeah.
Grant's skeleton for $10,000.
Yeah.
So then he goes to the party and he's out in the foyer, or is it the foyer?
That's right, yeah.
He does a whole bit on that.
Yeah.
And so, maybe I should call my lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there were a lot of episodes where he'd work jokes from his routines, his stand-up into the show.
Yeah,
like
of
that.
course.
But it's very funny, and hey, it's a good example.
Right, and
It's a nice foyer too.
yeah, that format of the show is a good tool for doing that.
Right.
Because he can just stop and make jokes.
Yes.
Kind of like Seinfeld tried to do it with the stand-up bits and find ways to integrate it in a way that's, in this case, it's of course very arch, but
Right. But since he talks to the audience, he can actually just like tell jokes.
yes, in the world of the show, it's totally realistic.
Yeah.
Whereas like there are those other shows, like like early episodes of something like Home Improvement or even the Cosby Show, where you tell, they're just taking the routine.
Right. That's a great point. And I did think it was kind of funny, like on Seinfeld, a lot of times when he would do something like that, the other characters would call him out on that.
Yeah.
And just like
He's out here doing
just,
a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a bit. So he goes into the party, and they're playing. Not only are they playing Win, Lose, or Draw, but they're playing with the host of Win, Lose, or Draw, Mr. Bert Convy.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
What
I
a
laughed
delight
so
it was
much.
to see Bert Convy. Huh?
Yeah. And as the show goes on, we learn he's very intense about it.
He is. Takes the game seriously.
And the drawings on the pad are like these very detailed caricatures of Pete Rose.
Three
this
of
woman
them.
have drawn three of them. Yeah. And like nobody knows what it is, and then
Yeah.
she's like, "A rose is a rose is a rose."
Yeah.
Convy's like, "Oh, maybe you should go on with roses."
Yeah, like the beautiful ones that are out there in the
In the
foyer.
yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Gary looks at it is foyer. And then he says, "But I always thought it was Pete Rose."
Yeah.
And he kind of ponders that for a minute.
Right. Yes, it's foyer because right. It's foyer. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I don't
It's
know.
foyer, but then he's like, I always thought it was Pete Rose.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But what is it in real life?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have one, so I don't worry about it.
Okay.
But he's talking to Jeff, and Jeff, again, it's like a perfect pairing because they're so similar.
Yes.
And he's like, "How's my hair?"
Yeah, yeah. And Jeff Goldblum is like such an offbeat celebrity himself
Yes.
that it's naturally funny just that he's got a party at Jeff Goldblum's house to begin with.
Yeah. And I was watching Jeff Goldblum, like, yeah, except for gray hair, he's exactly the same guy.
Pretty much, yeah.
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 He's just, the behavior is all the same.
Yeah, it was there.
And I just love it. Do you know Bert Convy? I think Bert says, "You're ready to play Win, Lose, or Draw?" And Gary's, "Oh, that sounds like my prom." But Gary and Jeff are, they're having a heart-to-heart because he feels guilty about this. Jeff's like, "Well, I once had to leave Bert Convy's house to go to Wink Martindale's to play tic-tac-toe."
Yeah.
He's like, "I just told him what was going on, and our friendship is fine."
Yeah, his friendship with Wink doesn't affect his
Yes,
friendship
it didn't
with,
diminish the
yeah.
other. Gary does make I wish I'd written it down, but a dig about Transylvania 65.
Yes, again. It was a pretty notorious bomb at the time, I remember.
Yeah.
Like I think many people were making fun of that movie for a while. But it gets pretty brutal treatment here. I've never seen that movie actually.
I haven't either. But, Jeff's like, he's like, "You know what? I'll come to the birthday party." It's that's a great gesture.
What a mensch.
Yeah. And then we find Convy's like being aggressive by getting them to play, but we also, it turns out he resents Wink Martindale.
It seems like it, doesn't it?
Yes. And then, Gary has never played.
Does he say like, "Look, I may not be Wink Martindale. This may not be tic-tac-toe. But the least you can do is come over and play Win, Lose, or Draw. It is your house,
Right.
And the way Bert Convy says it is great.
Yeah.
Bert Convy never disappoints, but he's particularly good in this episode.
He is. So Gary he just writes the clue on the board.
Yeah. I think it's like Rear Window.
Yeah.
This one is, He just writes rear window. Like, oh, that's not how it works, And it's funny too, because like he's sort of like half begging off a little bit as he gets it. Well, I don't really know, and he's just kind of looking around like he's confused before he actually goes and do it. So it makes it just for the purpose of the joke. It shows that he's not doing it on purpose. That he's like just genuinely befuddled and doesn't get the premise of the game.
Yeah. And then the next day, Gary's with Nancy, and he's wrapping Grant's birthday present, and bragging about all the things he's gotten done today. He's bought a present and the wrapping paper. And he told Grant this is happening, so Grant, we know, he's explaining that Grant's all excited about it. And then there's a phone call, and Nancy answers, as I guess she often does. It's Garry Shandling's show.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's Jeff, and he can't make it because his caterer threw his back out, and he has to prepare 150 pounds of veal paillard. Does that sound?
Yeah, it was veal or something or other. Some variant of veal.
Paillard. I don't know.
I don't. I'm not a big veal eater, so I didn't. That didn't stick with me.
I really only know veal piccata, mostly from Letterman. But for some sort of charity luncheon, Gary faints.
Yeah.
Then Nancy offers another helpful solution. He can go over and help Jeff, and then they can go to the party together. And then they talk about the faint, and neither of them really is impressed with the faint.
Yeah.
And then in the end, he's like, "Listen, Lois, I have to fly to Jeff Goldblum's house now."
And then sort of mocks flying off. Another Seinfeld similarity.
Yes, yeah.
The Superman connections.
Right, yeah. And then we see Jeff and Gary making this veal. And I love it because it looks like a cooking segment from a talk show.
It does.
Or like a PBS cooking show.
Like a small little kitchen, and Jeff is totally focused. Gary is anxious about, getting it all done.
Yeah, but Jeff explained, direct your anxiety towards the veal.
I like that.
And for some reason, Jeff Goldblum has a walk-in freezer in his, like a professional walk-in freezer
right
in his
next
house.
to his little kitchen or prep area there.
Yeah. So, they're taking the veal they've made in there, and then Jeff asks Gary to get the butter, which is behind the door.
Yeah.
And as Gary's getting, can you see this coming?
Yeah. He looks right at the camera while he's got his hands full
right
by the door.
And then it's not even like an accident.
No.
He just shuts the door with the back of his
foot.
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Casually.
Boy, this is the thing I remembered most vividly about this episode is I remember my dad and I laughing like crazy, watching this, and just, can you see this guy? Just, oh my God, it was just so hilarious. And I got to give my dad props because I probably wouldn't have been watching. He's probably the reason I got into the show. That he wanted to watch it, and yeah, I just remember us laughing our heads off at that. It was so classic.
And I know you like Goldblum's kind of reaction to it.
Yeah. He just such anxiety and just disbelief, and
right. And he immediately goes, well, Gary says when he agreed to the series, he said, as long as I don't do a scene where I'm locked in a freezer.
Yeah, and he's saying this a camera shot through looking into the little window.
Yeah.
Into the inside the freezer.
Right.
And then he has to beckon, the camera to come back around.
Yeah, and I think he's talking to the audience too. He's like, don't just sit there.
Yeah.
But Goldblum's totally forget. He's suggest a cannibalism pact.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though there's tons of food there in the locker, in the freezer for one thing.
Yeah. And Gary says, well, let's eat all this other stuff and see if we have an appetite.
Yeah.
and it's like, if only someone would talk about me and my ears could warm us up.
Yes, Jeff says he's already starting to feel hypothermia. He's fingers and toes. He's rubbing himself and totally panicking right away.
Right. And then later, somehow they've gotten out, and they're breaking into the Shoemaker house, which I think the door is just unlocked. But
I like how Jeff kind of mutters, "Boy, it's a lot easier to get in here than it was to get out of my freezer."
Yes, and of course the freezer didn't have a handle on the inside.
Yes.
That would be foolish.
Yeah.
And there's defaced posters of them, and so they go up to Grant's bedroom and they're trying to wake him up, but he's a very heavy sleeper. He finally wakes up and he's like, Jeff. Gary's like, oh, he almost said Jeff Bridges. That was frightening.
Yeah.
But Grant, of course, is impressed, and it turns out they were rescued because Goldblum's wife at the time, Gina Davis, came down for some microwave pancakes.
Yeah. I had totally forgotten that Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum were married, actually. I guess that was a pretty big deal at the time, but yeah, I'd forgotten that until that line.
They sing Happy Birthday, and Pete and Jackie come in, and they're happy, and they decide to move the party downstairs, and of course...
Yes, well, I think it was Pete that suggests, hey, why don't we move the party downstairs? And he said, why don't we let's get the home version of Win, Lose, or Draw.
Yes.
And I like how Gary and Jeff just kind of like look at each other and just, home version of win, lose, or draw. If they only knew, huh?
Right. And then as Gary's walking out of the bedroom, he's closing. He's like, "Don't worry, it won't lock."
Yeah.
And then the end, so the closing monologue, Gary's delivering, and Bert Convy and Nancy have come over for this party, and he explains that don't worry, there was no compensation from win, lose, or draw except a free jacket, which is like a satin.
It's a pretty sweet jacket.
It is.
Like it's got like a turquoise and black or some blue and black color scheme. Really nice. It's the kind of thing like you might think, oh, that only looks good because Burt Reynolds made it look good.
Right, yeah.
But no, when he holds it up, it looks pretty good. I kind of wanted one of those awesome jackets.
Yeah. And that's the episode, and it's great.
It was really funny. I mean, and part of it is, if you haven't seen it, I mean, we're describing it, but comedy especially, you really have to see it. But it really is hilarious. A great example of the show, and Goldblum's perfect.
Yeah.
Convy is used very well, and Gary's so funny. And I kind of like the fact that it involves the Schumachers. I kind of like them, just the notion of him having these regular civilian friends.
Yeah, no, I like them. And Nancy's a civilian too, right? A school teacher.
Yeah. Now, later on, she gets Ian, her Australian friend, becomes like a boyfriend. I didn't like that character at first. I think it was a soap opera actor. I think Ian Buchanan played him. But he has his moments too. He becomes kind of like a regular.
And is she's not in the fourth season or most of it? Or?
Yeah, she sticks around.
Okay.
I think you see less of her and some of the other characters as, they kind of have his wife in there too. Because you meet like his wife's family. I think maybe the character's name is Jessica too. I don't remember offhand. But and somebody else that one of the cast members, we don't see Leonard Smith, unfortunately, who's a great, the president of the condo association. And, he's always good. He's sort of like very full of himself, especially like in his role as president of the condo association. That's pretty funny.
And
usually.
as part of his deal too, he's trying to weasel his way onto the show.
Yeah.
And of course, played by Paul Wilson.
Yes, with 2 L's.
Yes.
He's his sidekick on the Garry Shandling anniversary special. So yeah, great comic actor.
Of course, Paul from Cheers. I've only seen him in a couple, but that's there's a good reason to watch more. Just to see more Paul Wilson.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking, I think I'd given you some suggestions. I just want to mention a few of my other favorite episodes. There's one called Save the Planet, I think, where Gary is sort of reunited with his old ecology teacher who has kind of a source of family embarrassment that he provides, and that's got another musical cameo. I won't give it away because it's hilarious. It's one of my favorite parts of the show, but it leads to like a musical moment that's really funny. There's another one, they did a live election show for 1988 with Don Cornelius hosting election coverage from like Gary's house, and that is like an ongoing theme through the episode. And there's a parody of The Natural. Every now and then they would do an actual parody, like they parodied The Fugitive, but they did a whole episode where Gary's like a ping pong player who's with a mysterious past kind of, and it's a whole takeoff on The Natural. That's very good. And another one, Gary Goes Golfing, kind of a more later, one of my favorite later ones, I think in the 3rd season though, but with Martin Mull, where he's in a charity golf tournament, and that one's really good too. So, but really anything in the first couple of seasons, you can't go wrong.
And I enjoyed Gary Falls Down a Hole.
Yeah.
Which was a play on the Baby Jessica situation. His mother appears in that, the character of his mother.
She's a great character too. I think earlier on, and she's prominent in that Save the Planet episode. She has a prominent role in that, and she's kind of interesting. She's kind of like overprotective, but kind of clueless sometimes. There's one episode where her and Grant, I think, have a kind of a falling out, and that's kind of weird. Weird relationship because Grant, I think, gets a job at her pet store, but isn't like taking it seriously, and so there's some friction there.
Yeah, and she calls Gary Bubba.
Yes,
which is cool because the first episode she appears in that comes up. I forget, he just says, "Oh, my nickname's Bubba."
Yeah,
and then they keep going.
Somewhere Carlton Cuse was watching and incorporated that into Nash Bridges. And had Don Johnson call everybody Bubba. Yet another of the myriad ways that Garry Shandling show influenced other great television.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great show. I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah, it's good. It holds up.
Yes, I mean, I think particularly for people who listen to this podcast, one, it's just entertaining, of course. But 2, of course, if you're listening to this, you're probably familiar with a lot of the conventions or cliches of sitcoms.
Yeah.
And so it's going to appeal to you.
Yes.
Probably. And, and then there's the sort of, again, the time capsule thing that we talk about. I mean, just that this episode had, Jeff Goldblum at sort of the height of his leading man period, Win, Lose, or Draw, which was all over the place at the time, and the jeans Gary and
right.
Grant and Pete are wearing.
Mm-hmm.
some big hair, not just Gary's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it gets as much attention as it deserves, but we're giving it some today, and hopefully you'll be inspired to seek out the episodes. As of this podcast, they're not streaming officially, but they seem to be a little bit easier to find online than I thought they were. Like I had some DVDs for a while, so it wasn't as much of an issue for me.
And the official DVDs that was like a limited release or something?
I think so. I think the first season you can get like really cheap, but like the complete series set is like out of print and super expensive for whatever reason. So it may be difficult to find the complete set, which I would have liked to have gotten that because it has like a lot of extras on it and things like that. Like the Larry Sanders set. I think he participated in it and did a lot of stuff for it. So
maybe they'll put it out again at some point.
Yeah, Judd Apatow, make that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
He seemed to be carrying on the legacy. So give us an affordable repackaging of that DVD set.
Right.
Por favor.
Yeah, I bet he wants to. Yeah. I mean, just like I haven't read the book, but I remember watching the documentary that he did that goes with the book, or the book's based on that, whatever the connection is, and in there it was clearly like he and a lot of other people had love for that show. We're questioning why they didn't quite understand Gary's misgivings about it.
Yeah, it does seem like he was actually like really kind of tormented, and it wasn't all a bit. He was neurotic about a lot of things, but it does seem like he found a lot more inner peace in the years that followed, especially like getting out of Larry Sanders and stuff, and had this kind of late stage of his career where he was a big mentor to other comedians, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and he had that period where he was just kind of acting, like I guess before Larry Sanders, like between the two shows, he was doing stuff with Warren Beatty and
and there was that movie.
Did he direct that movie?
What Planet Are You From?
He wrote that.
I think that was Mike Nichols did that, and he wrote it, and it just didn't work for a variety of reasons. But I think that might have discouraged him even a little bit.
Right. He was in that remake of Affair to Remember, I think.
That remake of what?
The Warren Beatty, like an Affair to Remember.
Oh yeah, Love Affair.
Yeah, Love Affair. Yeah.
With Annette Bening and Warren Beatty.
Yeah, I think he was he was the best friend role or something.
And he somehow found his way into the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yes, yeah.
As Senator Stern. And
right.
I really just loved the fact that he was in there at all. That always gave me a kick.
Sure, that was Favreau.
Yeah.
Favs.
Yeah.
and then his heel turn, that was good too.
Yeah.
Or more heel turn. He was already a heel, but.
Right.
So, yeah. Gone Too Soon. Great show. 2 great shows he made.
Yeah, this is one of the better episodes we've covered in a while, I think. So hope you folks enjoyed us talking about it, and love to hear your feedback on what you think about the It's Garry Shandling show and some of your favorite episodes if you do remember the show. And there's many ways you can do that. You can visit us at battleofthenetworkshows.com, and mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com is our direct email address. You can also go to our Facebook group, Battle of the Network Shows on Facebook. Just go and join us there. We'd love to talk about this stuff with you. And Mike, we got interesting feedback regarding one of our earlier episodes this season, our mod episode. And our good friend Amy had some interesting comments. I thought maybe I could share those here real quick.
Go for it.
And interestingly, I think she had been, just kind of watching off air. So she writes to us and says, coincidentally, I just watched the Mods musical episode last week. Then I listened to the podcast this morning. That was one weird episode. And she clarifies Mod, not the podcast. Our podcast was pretty conventional, in a good way. She says, I've been recording and watching the Mod episodes in order, and I'm up to, season 2, episode 18, which is right around the Mod's musical episode, I think. She also says, I agree with you that Rue McClanahan looks older on Mod than she did on the Golden Girls. I remember that when Vivian showed up for the first time on Mod, I looked up her age and couldn't believe it was 39. Very unflattering hairstyle and wardrobe. I wonder if that was intentional since Mod is the main character. Now, that's an interesting thing I hadn't thought of, that they didn't want her to upstage B. Arthur.
Maybe he had the Norman Lear and the other writers, they had the whole thing planned out.
Yeah.
And they knew she was going to get a facelift in the next season.
Yeah.
And so that they weren't going to ask Rue McClanahan to actually get a facelift.
No.
So they intentionally sort of made her look older.
De-glammed her a bit. Yeah, it's possible. Everything's connected in the Learverse, as we know.
Right.
Amy continues, I guess I'll stop watching these Mod episodes once the next one in line isn't among the ones my TiVo has captured. She says she's got quite a few from season 3, 4, and 5 recorded, but right now she doesn't have the complete seasons. And then she says, I can't say I'll be heartbroken when that happens. She's really getting tired of Mod and Walter screaming. She says, one episode after Mod's musical featured Mod and Walter having a shouting match at a restaurant, and they even yelled at other patrons when asked to quiet down. So obnoxious and not funny to me at all.
Wow.
I understand that point of view.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody, and especially not in more than, controlled doses, maybe.
And one thing you don't get on Garry Shandling's show?
What's that?
A lot of people yelling.
No, you don't, do you?
No.
It's not very frantic. Like, even the frantic moments are relatively subdued.
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum's not yelling
No.
that they're going to die.
Yeah.
He's stating it in
He's Jeff
exasperated
Goldbluming
but calm
them.
fashion. Yes. And when Gary's worried about, what's going to happen and how to get out of his dilemmas, he's fretting, but he's not yelling. So thanks, Amy, for listening and supporting the podcast and for sharing, kind of your thoughts on mod. We'd love to get more of that and try to incorporate it into the show like this when we can, because we haven't done that a lot, but we do love to provide you guys' comments too when possible.
Yeah, and we should have mentioned this before, but since we are doing a show about a show that breaking the fourth wall even more, as a scheduling experiment this season, we are placing some bonus episodes in between every 3 or so episodes. So should extend the season a little more, but give us a little more time to get everything done without real interruptions.
You can still look forward to the episodes each week, and I think we got some really good bonus episodes too lined up.
Yeah. So we'll be back next week with something.
That's right. This episode brought to you by Conair Hair Products. Conair, how does my hair look? This episode also brought to you by the Super Deluxe Anniversary Home Edition of Win, Lose, or Draw, featuring a giant drawing pad, 6 high-quality markers, a Burt Convy wig, and a Burt Reynolds mustache. This episode also brought to you by the Walk-In Freezer Association of America. You'd think we'd add a handle on the inside. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.